Okay, don't forget Diane's constant promotion of our newsletters, electronic and print. Let's quickly go through bookkeeping on time, because you need to see this to get the real point. There's Nova Scotia, Canada. Yes, I took that picture. My camera was slightly out of focus, but I'll tell you what, it's important, because in 1986, more than 100,000 bones were found in this fossil deposit at the bottom of the layers there, including crocodiles, sharks, lizards, fish and dinosaurs, etc. Notice anything? Because it's got all this on a sign just a little way away from the cliff. That's also on the sign. Red layer, black layer, red layer, black layer, red layer, black layer. Obviously a pattern that's there, and they've got all the names and supposed times and eras down the side. But yet, when you check the textbooks, they tell you that there's 1,000 meters of rock in that vast cliff that was there in Nova Scotia, took 40 million years to form. Fine. What happens if you start doing the real maths? Because to be honest, people are hopeless at big figures. They never check. I mean, most politicians know that. If they want the voters to be enticed, they'll say, we guarantee 30 million to be set aside for farmers. Well, there's 31 million farmers. That doesn't help the farmers at all. Okay, the rate of formation here, 1,000 years to cover your big toe. What do we mean by things like that? If you divide the time by the supposed distance of rock formed, then you end up with a problem all around the planet. In fact, if you have a look at this map here, and yes, I've walked that entire coast. In fact, I've walked much of the British coast and much of the Alaskan coast and much of the West American coast. And here's what you notice. We're going to Saltburn-on-Sea. There's where I have to end up. And yes, I did get wet. And yes, there were great rocks around there on the cliff. And yes, look what I found. It's now in our Joseph Museum in the UK. Can you see? Well, take you a bit closer. Can you see the scallop shell, the pecten shell? Can you see that large equisetum, the plant with the stripes on it? In fact, going back a bit further, this has become a site which is well known in the geological fraternity. Saltburn, well, salt, you know what salt is. Burn is usually a little creek in Old English, etc. They've even got a diagram from the Geological Society. Thanks, guys. But look at some of the things it says. This 170 meters of strata you can see from the top of Warsaw Hill represents, what does that say? Nearly 16 million years of our Earth's history. In fact, let's go. There's 16 million years worth of layers from the top of the hill down to the place where I found the fossil. Now, it's easy if you say it quickly, but look what happens. If you divide 170 meters by 16 million years, it took you approximately 2,500 years to cover your big toe. I'll guarantee they never did that in your geology course. I'll guarantee they said it so quickly you didn't even question the thought in your mind. In fact, there's my big toe, with boots on, of course. There's my hammer, and there's the specimen. So how big is this specimen? Well, there it is close up. In fact, when you look at the pecten shells in the UK, this is Jurassic rock. The pecten shells, you know, the scallop shells down the beach, you know, how long would it last? How long would a plant last if you took the time allegedly hidden in their answer to actually bury the fossil? That fossil there was 8 millimeters, a third of an inch thick. At 1/100th of a millimeter per year, it would take 800 years to cover this fossil. Now we're back to Glenn's problem. After one era to bury 1/100th of a millimeter per year, 800 years burying that scallop or burying that plant, there's not going to be anything left. Now, this is not I'm not the first person to make this point. I give full credit to Derek Ager, who wrote that book, and I'd encourage you to read it. And no, he's not a creationist. Yes, he did hate the creationists. B, he's now dead and changed his mind. Sure, for sure, I'm absolutely convinced of that. But he recognized this before he passed. If one attempts to calculate the rates of sedimentation in the past, the results are usually ludicrous. Soil takes time to form. The absence of soils mean it either was never there or it was washed away real quick. Take your pick. But it's not there. But the minute you try to calculate the rates of sedimentation, you get ludicrous results. Now, a couple of weeks back, we were doing the geologic column, and somebody brought up this system in North Dakota. A real well log. As I said, I've traveled all around the planet. I get to go to see many of these places. This is the well log from Hunter State Larson. Why is it famous? It's one of the few well logs where you can characterize each section of it as being in the normal order that's in the textbooks. And we have here, well, the tertiary Fort Union Formation is found at 100 feet. Oh, now look, stop a moment. Have you ever bothered to find out why we call rocks? The tertiary Fort Union Formation, I have collected from the Fort Union Formation, but it took me a long time to ask this question. Tertiary means number 3. Why did we call a whole heap of rock layers number 3? The answer is simple. You start with a Christian worldview, and the first rocks that God made, the primary rocks, were the base of the creation rocks in creation week. Nothing died, nothing was buried, there were no fossils, right? Not tertiary. That was primary rocks. Then the secondary rocks occurred when animals could die after sin, when they could be buried after Noah's flood or during Noah's flood. So primary from creation, secondary from the time of Noah's flood, and tertiary from Noah's flood onwards. Now that system is still intact. Cretaceous simply means chalky, come from the French, but it's borrowed by the English more large because of the white cliffs at Dover. Notice the depths that we find them at the side. Now I could bore you with all these names. Triassic means 3 colours, nothing to do with millions of years. Permian, well, Charles Lyell gave us that word because the king, who was the Tsar's cousin, sent Charles Lyell and the others across to work on a new series of rocks that have been found at Perm, named after a place. Pennsylvanian, well, that's because the Americans can't spell Carboniferous. It's the rocks in Pennsylvania. Notice the depths that we're finding them at. In fact, you can go all the way right down to the bottom, Mississippi, and all the way down to Devonian, all the way down to Silurian, all the way down to Ordovician. Now we're back to England. That's where the Ordovici people used to live, on the border of England and Wales. And they're currently extinct. And this is a joke in geology. If you find a rock with lots of shells in it and fossils that are currently extinct, you name it after the currently extinct people. Catch it? No, most people never do, but we geologists have a weird sense of humour. Down to Cambrian, then Precambrian, there's the bottom of the well, 15,064 feet. Yes, you're like me. When are the Americans going to go metric? It makes mathematics a whole lot easier, but we can use it because there's the question. I remember giving this question to a practical geologist who was struggling with the age of the earth and the Bible, and I asked him, we're standing here, you're an oil driller, there's your oil well, how far down to the oil layer? He said about 3,000 feet. I said, okay, in the 300 million years from that layer to the present, how much rock formed each year? He'd never done this sort of maths before. 14,945 feet at this well, formed in 600 million years. That's approximately 1/40,000th of a foot per year, approximately 3/10,000th of an inch per year, or you can put it into metric. Or if you like to stand there and wait for your big toe to be covered, it will be 3,300 years before your big toe is covered. And you're going to be dead and fallen over and decayed long before that. So we're looking at impossibilities. In fact, if you like me to throw in the diagrams, here's a cross-section of Alberta. I throw in this because I was doing a debate in Alberta, and the guy opposing me said, oh, look, we've got a complete geologic record in Alberta. And he started to tell me all about this. Now, by the way, the different colours do not go right across the map, so therefore the well log is not complete at all. The checkered brick-like ones usually represent limestone of some sort, but giving you the whole section in that debate before you get over to the metamorphics on the left-hand side, there's what you've got. 3 kilometres formed in 600 million years. To cut to the gist, that's 4,000 to 5,000 years to cover your big toe. You are not going to bury a plant fossil. You are not going to bury a shell fossil. You're not even going to bury your big toe. So if you want to deal with reality in the geologic column, then you have to deal with the fact that the time isn't there. And if there's no soil, that isn't there either. So therefore you have to ask, what would deposit this fast enough to actually preserve fossils or preserve oil? Remember that geologist I was standing on the cliff there at his well site? And I said, okay, divide the distance to 3,000 feet by your 300 million years, and what's the answer? He just puzzled a little while and he said, you wouldn't get any oil at all. It just would be decomposed before it was buried. You see, he hit on the truth. If you actually deal with the real depths, if you actually deal with the supposed real figures, then one divided into the other gives you an absurd answer. Only options, there are huge gaps in the record, or else you're reading the record in the wrong way. And that's the point that Derek Ager made. And you people out there have to come to grips with that Noah's flood has and is and always has been and always will be a way better explanation for producing so many fossils on such a global scale. You can put it into a kid's song about lots of water and lots of mud, or you can be objective and say, here's what we would expect. And you have to get rid of Steno. As much as we love him for identifying shark's teeth and forcing us to reality, when it came to rocks, bless his heart, but he started on the wrong foot, and Charles Lyell built on it, Charles Darwin built on that, now Dawkins, Attenborough, the BBC, the ABC in America, and they have been led astray. Just as the theological student was being led astray who contacted me last week and said, the lecturer said we only have to worry about man made in the image of God. No, you have to worry about everything God said, because he didn't take millions of years to make the first day of the week. The first day of the week is tied into the coming of Jesus Christ. That's how interconnected all these things are. Well, let me just finish here by reminding you, before we go back to our last section on a few questions, and then Sam will close us off, we do have a free newsletter. We do have a meeting coming up here in Australia. Keep your eyes on our website if you live in southeast Queensland. That's just southwest of Brisbane. From Adam to Australia, where do the Aborigines come from? How long have they been down under? Who owns the land? Etc., etc.